Okay, now we're ready. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to today's lecture titled Marco Polo 700 Years Later, His Legacy in Italian and Western History, delivered by Mr. Federico Rampini. My name is Diego Fossati, and I am a professor here at the Department of Government, Department of Public and International Affairs at City University in Hong Kong. I would first like to acknowledge that this event is made possible by the collaboration between CityU and three partners. This event is supported by the Consulate General of Italy in Hong Kong, and it is co-organized by CityU itself, the Italian Institute of Culture, and ANSA, the Italian News Agency. I would like to express my gratitude to all of these parties involved that have made this event possible through their hard work over the last several weeks. The lecture will start shortly. Guests will trickle in a few minutes, and my role before that is to introduce a little bit a class, the College of Liberal Arts and Social Science, that is the department, the institute here at CityU that has organized this event, and also to give you a little bit of context about this event and how it relates to a broader program of celebrations about the legacy of Marco Polo. So let me start here. No, the previous one. Yeah, it's just, it's not moving forward. Yeah, okay, try now. It is moving forward, okay. I want to mention, like here, as I said, the College of Liberal Arts and Social Sciences has taken a leadership role in organizing this. Within class, a Department of Chinese and History, English, Public and International Affairs have contributed, and also one research center, the Southeast Asia Research Center, of which I am Associate Director, a very special center also because it is the only research center in Hong Kong that specializes on Southeast Asia, an increasingly important region for Hong Kong and China. So I would like to tell you a little bit about class as we wait for our guests to come in. This is the structure of the college. I have mentioned a few departments. In addition to that, we also have a Department of Linguistics and Translation, a Language Center, Language Training Center, Department of Media Communication, Social Behavioral Science. We offer our students a wide range of courses, including 10 undergraduate programs and 13 postgraduate programs. The result is a thriving and robust community of undergraduate and postgraduate students, and an even larger community of alumni. Beyond the departments, we also have a host of research centers, which you can see here in this slide. The idea is to facilitate scholars working on specific issues, like coming together. And as you can see, these centers are mostly managed, these labs, mostly managed by department. Their goal is to promote research excellence in various areas and intellectual exchange, but also to engage with various stakeholders here in Hong Kong. Just to give you an example, the Southeast Asia Research Center that I just mentioned, we do quite a lot of work with communities of Southeast Asian migrants here in Hong Kong. For example, by working on empowerment programs for domestic workers. All centers have missions of this kind. In addition to this center, we also understand that to address like big social questions, you also need to work together with scholars of different backgrounds, with an interdisciplinary approach. And this is the idea behind the establishment of research clusters. We have four. One Health specializes in public health and health policy. Digital Society studies technologies and the latest implications of technology for culture, for society, for the economy. And we have a third one, Smart City, that it has a focus on sustainable development, especially in the urban context, and on lifestyle, improving the quality of life. And finally, Brain, as the name suggests, is dedicated to the study of human brain. In all of this I mentioned, affective, cognitive, behavioral, and how that has implications for social interaction. Once again, I am stuck. we pride ourselves of doing quite well in international rankings. We have some departments ranked among the highest internationally. You see some data on these slides, examples include linguistics, social policy, and administration. And public administration, we have the largest department here in Hong Kong, and also the one that is ranked #1 in Hong Kong and second in Asia. Also, when it comes to teaching, we take that very seriously and we strive for excellence, as you can see in the high number of teaching awards that we have achieved. In addition to that, we also have a lot of prominent scholars that have achieved the highest fellowships, accolades from various institutional and professional bodies in Hong Kong and internationally. You can see some of the most prominent examples in this slide. I won't mention them individually, but these are some very prominent examples. There are many more who are also doing excellent work in research in various research centers that I mentioned before. Here is how we think of the key features of what we do with our students. We do a lot of research-led learning. We ensure that the cutting-edge research that is done in centers and by these leading scholars that I just mentioned find its way through the classrooms so that students can benefit from it. We have a strong focus on practical knowledge, meaning that we ask all of our students to take like internship and work experience opportunities, final year project capstones. These are all ways in which our undergrads and graduate students can tailor their course of study based on their career interest. We have a multicultural competence, a very international faculty, and collaboration programs with the universities in Europe, Asia, and beyond, including a very prestigious joint program with Columbia University of New York. And this international focus is reflected in our student body. You might have heard that CTU is ranked as the most international university in the world. 60% of our own students have participated to this kind of program to expose them to a global experience. So class is very much a big contribution of why City University has such a strong international outlook. Moving forward, we are planning to double down our effort to study questions at the intersection between science and technology on the one hand and social and humanistic knowledge on the other. So this is something that we are already doing, and we have plans to strengthen down the road in the future. But enough with class. Just let me introduce very briefly why we are here today. It's about Marco Polo, of course, and I know you have already quite a good knowledge of the historical figure. Perhaps the only thing that I would want to mention very briefly is to remind us of the importance of his figure as a key proponent of cultural exchange between East and the West. Marco Polo was not only an avid, intrepid explorer with that kind of spirit, he was also a gifted writer, and that made all the difference. That is why we remember him as such an important figure. Through his writing, he has shaped imaginaries of Asia among the Europeans. And as President Bowie mentioned, like a few minutes ago, he's also a figure that is very much loved within Asia and in China in particular. He spoke very highly in flattering terms of the beauty that he saw in his Asian travel. And he contributed for this reason to really improve understanding of Asia in Europe. 2024 is important because it marks the 700th anniversary of his passing. Italian authorities, both in Italy, including in his hometown of Venice, and other places in Italy and abroad, have organized a series of events to commemorate this anniversary. And we are privileged that for Hong Kong, these events are going to take place right here in our campus, CTU in Hong Kong. Of course, this lecture by Mr. Rampini is part of this program, but I want to mention two more events that are worth your attention. The first is a photographic exhibition, and the second is a program of engagement with the secondary school children. The first, you might have already seen right across the hall, right out of this lecture theater, is an exhibition titled Marco Polo and His Footprints. There is a curated selection of images of all the various places that Marco Polo traveled. Very well done, and including a wide range of regions. It is just open. You can visit it at any time during the until like April the 14th. If you don't have access to campus at CTU, you need to register using that QR code. As I mentioned, this exhibition covers the various places seen and traveled by Marco Polo, including on his way to China from Venice to the Central Asian countries of Iran and Afghanistan, and then various locations in China. As you can see, he traveled quite extensively there, both in the west of the country and in the east. And then we have a fourth section detailing like photos of his travels to, well, inspired by his travels to Southeast Asia. And finally, on his way back home, where he traveled to countries such as India and Turkey. So a very big, a very interesting route. All of these places are covered in the exhibition. Finally, as I mentioned, we do have a program to engage also students of secondary schools. What we're doing for them, we've sent out a lot of invitations for these school children, to school principals. We are going to give them a tour of this photographic exhibition that I just mentioned. And in addition to that, we will give them the opportunity to learn about Marco Polo, to be exposed to this narrative through talks that have been designed by CTU faculty. You can see them here on the slides. The first discusses some interesting evidence of Marco Polo's travels in various regions. The second has more of a focus on literature. It discusses the influence of Marco Polo's writing for the work of another prominent Italian writer, Italo Calvino, and his work on imaginary travel, imaginary cities. And finally, we have one that focuses more on Southeast Asia. Marco Polo is most well known for his travels to China, but also he travels quite a bit around there. So the third talk is exactly about that. So this is what we're doing to try to expose the school children to the figure of Marco Polo, but more broadly to perhaps spark a little bit of interest in exploration, in travel, and you know, an interest in similar experiences for these school children down the road. Now, I see that our guests have come in already. So the guests and the speaker himself have arrived. They have taken their seats already. So without further ado, then I will leave the floor to Professor Esterina Nervino, our Master of Ceremonies for today. Thank you all for listening. Thanks for coming, and I hope you will enjoy the lecture.
Ladies and gentlemen, to those ones who have just joined, welcome to CTU. My name is Esterina Nervino, and I was the MC earlier, and I will be with you also for the lecture. Thank you for joining Mr. Rampini's lecture, titled Marco Polo 700 Years After, His Legacy in Italian and Western History, How an Italian Merchant and Traveler from Venice Shaped the Vision of China in His Time and Beyond. This is part of the overarching event, Marco Polo and His Footprints, which actually unfolds in two moments, the opening ceremony and exhibition and this lecture, both of them included in the 30th anniversary of the City University of Hong Kong. Without further ado, as we have all been looking forward to it, I shall invite Mr. Federico Rampini on stage. Please, Mr. Rampini. It's a great honor for me to introduce you to Mr. Rampini. I'm sure he doesn't need any introduction, but I will give a brief one for those ones who are new to his work. Mr. Rampini is a journalist, writer, and public speaker, but also geopolitical analyst. Since 2009, he has lived in New York, where he's a global columnist for the Italian daily newspaper Corriere della Sera. He has also been a correspondent in Paris, Brussels, San Francisco, and Beijing for La Repubblica. I could go on and on for you in sharing the bio, but I would like to share with you that his last book is about Africa, and we have an upcoming work that will be actually published soon about Saudi Arabia. So without taking any longer, Mr. Rampini, I leave it to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you all. I'm very grateful to the academic authorities, to the Italian diplomatic and cultural authorities for the welcome, and I'm very glad to be back here. When I used to live in Beijing, I traveled very often to Hong Kong. Now, living in New York City, the flight is a little bit more longer, but I'm okay, and very happy to talk to you about Marco Polo. So Marco Polo, a son of merchants from Venice, was the most famous traveler of his time. His voyages began in 1271 with a visit to China, after which he served the emperor, then Emperor Kublai Khan of Mongol origin, on numerous diplomatic missions. On his return to the West, he was made a prisoner of war, prisoner, by the way, prisoner of fellow Italians, Genoese, and he met, while in jail, Rustichello da Pisa, who became his ghostwriter. They collaborated on his famous book, whose Italian title is Il Milione, the Million. The accounts of his travels provide a fascinating glimpse of the different societies he encountered, their religions, customs, ceremonies, and way of life, on the spices and silks of the East, on precious gems, exotic vegetation, and wild beasts. He died in 1324, exactly 7 centuries ago. But before I talk about his impact on the European perception of China, I will make a step back. Marco Polo was by no means the first European to visit China or to have a relationship to China. There were other merchants before him, and there were the missionaries bringing the Gospels and preaching the Christian religion to the Chinese. Religious proselytism as a motive to discover, explore, conquer the world is even more powerful than curiosity. It is older than the idea of progress, which is very recent. It is a formidable ally for the thirst for profit. We, as Europeans, had a long history of relations with China without really knowing China. So you can see these are very ancient maps of the Silk Road, 300 before, the several Silk Roads, 300 before Christ till 100 after Christ. This is just to remind you that there were trade relations, for instance, between China and Rome, the Republic of Rome, the Roman Empire, long before, more than 1 millennia before Marco Polo. In fact, the Mediterranean Sea was one of the final destinations for the trade of silk and spices from China. But Rome was in a very peculiar situation. They purchased a lot of stuff from China. In fact, Roman ladies were fond of silk dresses. Those were the fashionable dresses of their time. And because of that, Rome had a huge trade deficit. This is a very modern issue, a trade deficit with China. But they didn't know what China really was or where China really was. There were many legends about the Chinese people, the people who made the silk, a lot of imagination, but few facts. That's because trade was mainly in the hand of intermediaries, like the Indians and the Persians and other go-betweens. Silk was also at the center of a very famous espionage case during the Byzantium Empire, also known as the Roman Empire of the Orient. Christian monks stole silkworms from China and brought them to Byzantium, thereby ending a Chinese monopoly on silk. At the beginning of the Christian era, and then in the Middle Ages, we as Europeans, as Westerners, we go looking for China, first of all, for religious reasons. Before Marco Polo, shortly before him, there are two papal missions. In 1245, the Franciscan friar Giovanni da Pian del Carpine. A few years later, the Flemish-French monk Guillaume de Rubruck. Their mission is to ask the Mongol emperors, heirs of Genghis Khan, for help against the Muslims. The answer they receive is humiliating for our Western ego. A letter in which the Eastern Emperor demands an act of submission from the King of France. China has, at that time, an obvious superiority complex. It is willing to consider us only as vassals. If Europe wants protection, let it make an act of submission. Marco Polo's descriptions will later amply justify that idea of a hierarchy and a gap between us and them. His book Il Milione is treated by many of his contemporaries as the work of a boastful bullshitter, full of exaggeration, far-fetched, because the West could not conceive that such a more advanced civilization existed. But as the centuries passed, rereading Marco Polo confirmed that the author, even if supported by the brilliant pen of his prison companion Rustichello da Pisa, was anything but a liar. The descriptions of him were confirmed as new travelers brought back news from China. Among the technological, economic, and institutional superiorities, Il Milione describes the spread of coal as fuel, or the fiduciary paper money issued by the emperor at a time when only metal coins or letters of credit existed in our countries of merchant bankers. Ditto for the existence of printed books, which Marco Polo briefly mentions, 2 centuries before Gutenberg invented the printing press in Germany. Despite its superiority, the Mongol dynasty that rules China during Marco Polo's visit is eager for scientific discoveries. It is also inclusive and cosmopolitan. Marco himself is trusted by the Kublai Khan, who nominates him as an internal ambassador inside China, with a mission to explore the empire and brief the emperor on what he has seen. Marco's father and uncle, Niccolò and Maffeo Polo, had been entrusted with the following mission on the previous trip: to ask the Pope to send, I quote, 100 doctors knowledgeable in the 7 arts of the West. End of quote. The Pope does not follow up. Too bad. What a pity, what a wasted opportunity. However, almost 2 centuries later, the Jesuit Father Ricci will take advantage of that scientific curiosity shown by the Chinese. The travels of Pian del Carpine and the Polos have finally sparked our curiosity, and Mongolian Chinese influences appear among us in an unexpected way in art, starting with what is defined as the Sienese Renaissance, a Renaissance in that part of Tuscany with the city of Siena is located. In one adoration of the three kings painted by the great master Giotto, two Chinese characters are recognizable. In a painting by another master, Pisanello, the portrait of Saint George, two knights with clearly Asian facial features, probably Mongolian, are clearly visible. Tatars, a common name for the Mongols at that time, appear in the paintings of Ambrogio Lorenzetti. Many scholars have studied the influence in Italy of symbols and images from the Far East from the 13th to the 15th century. Even before Il Milione of Marco Polo, a turning point seems to be the Mongol invasion of Russia in 1238, following which the conquerors who came from the steppes begin to carry on a rich trade with the Genoese established on the Black Sea. The Genoese are the rivals of the Venetians, those who will imprison Marco Polo. Our Italian and European 14th century thus has the first Orientalist fashion. Chinese objects of the Yuan and Song dynasties make their appearance in Italian painting, and not only there. Another fascinating discovery concerns the Buddhist influence in the representation we make of the devil. Here, the motifs coming from the Far East infiltrate not only into Italy, but also into Northern Europe. Already in late Middle Ages, for example, the devil is depicted as a bat. We find him as a bat in Dante's Inferno and in many pictorial representations. Now, before that time, the evil birds were owls, as in the ancient Greek tradition. The bat as a diabolical animal seems to be a transformation and miniaturization of the dragon of the Chinese tradition. It has come to Europe through Persia. Monsters inspired by Chinese art populate the Dutch and German Gothic of Hieronymus Bosch, Bruegel, and Cranach. The demons with female breasts, the devils with tree branches instead of arms, with immense ears, horns, and elephantine trumps seem to have been copied directly from Buddhist iconography. Even those who paint the temptations of Christ or Saint Anthony in Europe at that time seem to draw on the most ancient depiction of the trials that the evil spirits impose on Buddha. The macabre dances and rotting corpses that populate Flemish painting of that time are full of references to the arts of the Far East, China, and even Japan. Moreover, in the late medieval and early Renaissance imagination, the biblical legends about the tribes of Gog and Magog, or the lands of the three kings, began to move towards China and the land of the Tatars. More useful than devils, more precious even than silk, there is another gift that China gives to Europe in the era in which the two civilizations begin to meet each other directly. It is the knowledge of geography and astronomy as instruments for sailing. Chinese cartography and tools for orienting sailors were more advanced than ours at the beginning of the 15th century. The emperors of the Ming dynasty could not imagine that that knowledge would have, in the long term, fatal military and strategic consequences for China once it fell into Western hands. At first, the flow of information from east to west seemed harmless in their eyes. Christopher Columbus was an avid reader of Il Milione, the book by Marco Polo. That book seems to have nurtured his projects. It is likely that the ocean crossings of Christopher Columbus and Amerigo Vespucci were made possible thanks to the geographical and technological know-how brought to Italy from the Far East. According to some reconstructions, a key role was played by a Chinese delegation visiting Florence in the year 1433. At that time, Western sailors had to navigate the seas without accurate measurement of longitudes. Chinese fleets, however, had been scouring the Indian Ocean for centuries with a better measurement of the position of the stars to determine both the latitude and the longitude of a ship at sea. Dignitaries sent to Florence by the Ming dynasty brought maps with them. It seems that the astronomer-geographer Paolo Toscanelli saw them. He realized he had a lot to learn and got to work. It is another case after Silk, where we copy the Chinese without paying the copyright. Toscanelli's new geographical maps are instrumental to Christopher Columbus and other navigators. The era of great discoveries opens, which broadens the possibilities of colonialism. China, at the beginning of the 15th century, is much wealthier than Europe and also technologically more sophisticated. Slowly, she begins to lose ground. The future Western aggressors will come precisely from the sea, smaller and in many respects more backward peoples, but with a very fast learning curve in the new technologies of naval warfare. Religion and business are intertwined in the next chapter of our explorations of the East, next after Marco Polo. The first European imperialism to appear on the Chinese coasts are those of Portugal and Spain, soon followed by Holland, France, England. The Iberians use missionaries with a preference for the Jesuits as the spearhead for their commercial and geopolitical settlement operations. Fabrics and spices are the big business. The land Silk Roads are flanked by the maritime ones. The ascending Europeans want to deal directly with Chinese suppliers, freeing themselves, if possible, from Arab, Turkish, Persian intermediaries. One figure stands out above all the others. It is the Italian Jesuit, Matteo Ricci. He is a giant for the role he played in the history of relations between the West and the East, right next to Marco Polo. Ricci is misunderstood while alive. He is too modern for his time. He senses things about China that Europeans don't want to see. Ricci is assigned by the Church to a strategic mission of that time, the conversion of the Far East to Christianity. The idea that germinated among us in the late Middle Ages crusades is still alive at the time of Ricci. That is, that by bypassing the vast enemy land controlled by Islam, powerful allies for Christianity could be found in the East, to be enlisted in a common coalition. The first stage of Ricci's Asian adventure in 1578 took him to India. In 1582, he moved to Macau, following the outposts of the nascent Portuguese imperialism. The following year, he landed in mainland China. The Jesuit will never leave China again. China is destined to become his second homeland for almost 30 years. He dies in 1610 in Beijing. His Chinese name is Li Madu, the wise man who came from the West. Ricci continues Marco Polo's work on another level. A multi-talented intellectual, formidable mathematical mind, gifted with exceptional curiosity and ability to learn, he is so attracted to Chinese civilization that he adapts his own Christian message, bordering on heresy. The Jesuit comes to such a profound knowledge of the two civilizations and the two cultures, the European and the Chinese, that he transforms himself into a sort of bivalent ambassador. He explains the Christian West to them, deciphers Buddhist and Confucian China for us. It is an overly ambitious operation. In fact, he succeeds only to a minimal extent and is often misunderstood by both. Since his arrival in China, Ricci is impressed by the cultural level of that civilization, just like Marco Polo. He learns the language. He even studies Confucius and translates it into Latin. Without failing in his original mandate to evangelize the Chinese, he understands that Confucian respect for knowledge is the key to making inroads into the local ruling class. To convert the people, miracles would be much more useful, in which others seem to excel. But as a good Jesuit, he prioritizes proselytism among the mandarins, the elites, the sovereigns. He engages in a sort of scientific competition to impress Chinese leaders with a display of the best Western knowledge. In astronomy, Ricci and other Jesuits use discoveries that the Catholic Holy Inquisition condemns as heretical. At Ricci's time, Copernicus' discoveries circulate, followed by the works of Galileo and Kepler. Using the most modern science of his time, the Jesuit corrects some imperfections of the Chinese lunar calendar with great advantage for the organization of the agricultural harvests that follow it. At that time, 3 astronomical systems were competing with each other in the court of the heavenly emperor: the Chinese, the Islamic, and the European. Thanks to the heretical European scientists, the Jesuits give Beijing a more precise calendar with important practical applications. Ricci is esteemed as a scientist, mathematician, physicist, astronomer, before being a religious figure. All these things create a reputation for Father Ricci as a quasi-heretic in Europe and a lot of enemies. The issue of Chinese rights, on which the Society of Jesus supports him, is exploited in political religious clashes inside Europe. Popes, European kings, various religious orders clash over China in reality to settle other power conflicts. It doesn't help Ricci that he can exhibit only a limited number of conversions, nor the growing hostility towards Christianity on the part of a China that is beginning to glimpse the expansionist ambitions of the Europeans. Indeed, even after Ricci, the Jesuits will continue to use Western sciences, the Bible mixed with Euclidean mathematics and Galileo's discoveries, as a Trojan horses to attempt the penetration into China. With them, the idea of a West as a bearer of modernity and rationality was born, which other Chinese ruling classes would rediscover at the moment of their decadence, starting from the 19th century. Marco Polo and Matteo Ricci's most important legacy will be celebrated centuries later by a secular, even atheistic and anti-clerical revolution, the Enlightenment. Among those French philosophers who inspired the revolution of 1789 and the Declaration of the Rights of Man, the first to deal passionately with China was Montesquieu. Montesquieu is one of the thinkers of the liberal state and the separation of the powers. In his most important work, The Spirit of the Laws, an entire chapter is entitled On the Empire of China. Montesquieu mixes some simplistic and today for us anachronistic statements with some intuitions and insights that will have a great influence on our way of seeing China. Due to its vast territory and the population that was already the largest in the world, China, according to Montesquieu, could only be governed through, I quote, slavish obedience to a despotic government, end of quote. And yet, Montesquieu sees in the Chinese empire, I quote, the best despotism in the world, end of quote. He is attracted by the Confucian vision of the sovereign as, quote, a father of the people, end of quote. Montesquieu dedicates many pages to another aspect of Confucianism, the importance of rituals in daily life, respect for formalities as a sign of adherence to moral principles that regulate the life of the family and society in an orderly manner. Rereading The Spirit of the Laws by Montesquieu, almost 3 centuries later, after its publication, is indeed instructive. Not because Montesquieu understood China for what it really is, he did not. But that vision of Montesquieu had an enormous influence on everything that was subsequently thought and written by Westerners about China. And all had begun with the fascination of one book, Il Milione by Marco Polo. Now, what can we learn from Marco Polo today? I am afraid we may have lost some curiosity on both sides, West and East. There are signs today that we might be descending into a Cold War mentality. We are all busy discussing how to defend ourselves from each other. We seem less focused on learning from each other. When there is bilateral misunderstanding, suspicion, and diffidence, as of today, usually the responsibility lies not only on one side. But assigning fault is not so important as trying to rebuild at least some degree of openness and curiosity. That maybe we can learn from Marco Polo. Thank you very much.